Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Skills Kickstart session on companies, locations, and system settings. We will go ahead and get started here in just a moment to make sure people have time to get in and get settled. But if you do have any questions during this time period, please don't hesitate to ask them in the Q&A tool. I will do my best to try to answer those during the session, but there will be some time afterwards to answer those questions as well. We do like to make this as informative and interactive as possible, so please don't hesitate. And as mentioned, we're going to go ahead and wait a minute just to make sure people get in here, and we'll go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so it looks like mostly everybody is here. So for those of you who just joined, this is the Skills Kickstart session on companies, locations, and system settings. Your presenter today will be me, Alex Luna, and I'll go ahead and talk about myself here in just a second. So let's go ahead and get into it. As mentioned, my name is Alex Luna. I am a customer enablement specialist here at Encompass, and I have worked with Encompass for a little over a year and a half now. So very excited to be presenting this information to you guys. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over companies and locations, how they are kind of similar and how they are mainly different. We are then going to discuss a little bit on how to add a new location, all the nitty-gritty aspects that go into it from the Encompass side, whereas the other information that you provide yourself as the distributor. And then lastly, we're going to talk through some of the system settings and their importance and why it's important to make sure that they are kind of correctly set. So go ahead and move along. We're going to start talking about those companies and locations. So starting off, let's talk about companies. Now, companies are the equivalent to a financial or business entity. This is not a tangible object. This is not where you could drive to. This is a entity who where the company typically owns the product before it's sold and where the money is going to once the product is sold. Now, it's not where the product is housed. It is just genuinely who owns the product and who receives the money for the product. Now, you got to keep in mind that if a distributor has multiple FEINs, tax IDs, or if they even file separate tax returns, they need to have multiple companies within Encompass. You can't just have one company if there are multiple FEINs. There have to be separate entities for each company. Now, moving on along as well, Encompass can house multiple companies within the site. You can have one company for NA products, one company for beer, and one company for food even. So you can house multiple companies. I haven't seen over 20, but you can. There's definitely no limit. Now, typically, companies have their own separate employees too. So that's just a good variation to kind of how you could separate them. You can have separate employees for company A that houses any products and separate employees and executive team members for company B with beer and liquor. Now, when you acquire a new company, that is showing where the money is going to. So you need different account mapping. That's the reason because it can be done in different states. And as I mentioned, it can be done by different executive teams. If company A is in Colorado and they're selling NA products, they need to kind of know what they're doing. So they may have their own executive team. Whereas company B, who's based out of Kansas, they are only selling beer and liquor. So they need an executive team who's well versed in that type of area. Now, moving on along too, these can be tied to different AR accounts. For example, if we're looking at company A that is working with assets such as vending machines or even line cleaning objects, that's going to want to be managed solely at company A. That line cleaning can be very different for how company B operates or company C. And so that's why we want to keep that asset tied with the AR account solely at company A. That kind of has to do with split invoicing as well, where split invoicing can be set up to give the correct company the credit for the product being sold from that same warehouse. Whereas NA goes to company B, liquor goes to company B. Or excuse me, NA goes to company A and liquor goes to company B. Now, to keep in mind as well for companies, when running end of day, a company generates a separate journal entry and the business activity goes to a separate general ledger company. That just kind of ties in how you need different companies for each of those AR accounts, how they're their own separate entities that own the product and that receive the money from the product. So now kind of vice versa of that, talking about locations, is a location is the physical, tangible warehouse. Now, this is where the location doesn't necessarily own the product, but it's where the product is being stored and housed. That's where all the inventory is. You know where it's at. You can get in a car and you can actually drive to this warehouse. An example of this is Google. Google is one massive company. However, they have numerous locations across the globe. There's some all throughout the US, there's some in Portugal, Spain, other European countries, South America. You can find it anywhere. And those are physical warehouses and locations for Google or companies for Google. Now, Google as its own is one sole business and financial entity. So, moving along, locations can belong to multiple companies. So, two companies can sell product out of the same physical warehouse, but they have different product portfolios and typically their own employees. Now, how you can represent this is you have one warehouse, and straight down that warehouse is a yellow line, a yellow taped line that goes between it. And that yellow line describes one side of that warehouse being company A and the other side of it being company B. Now, since they're two separate entities, two separate companies, you can't just carry product from one side of the warehouse to the other side of the warehouse because of that yellow line. You have to follow all the procedures since they're separate companies. So typically what we would see is that product would get loaded on a truck, it would go, it would drive around, and it would go to the receiving area for that other company because it follows all those standard protocols. You can't just cross that yellow line because it's in the same warehouse. It's two separate companies that is happening and where that product is being moved between. Now, this is also related to companies through invoices. So, when purchasing products for a location, there are asset or inventory asset account maps that tie the purchases back to the location and the company. That's what I was kind of saying, where those purchases are kind of tied between both because of that product, where the product lives in the warehouse but is owned and money obtained by the company. So, we're going to kind of see that here in the next slide with an overall diagram. So looking at this diagram, this is a very basic structure. We are looking at this diagram as if you only had one company and one location. Now, if you had multiple companies and multiple locations, this would look a lot different. This would be way more complex. It would have way more looking or way more to display in it, but we are just solely going off of one company and one location. So moving on along with this, you can see that within the company's site, if you go to the left-hand side, there is one company that belongs to that. Whereas on the right-hand side, there's one location. Now the location has invoices tied to it, it has invoice customers tied to it. It then ties that customer AR account where that AR account then goes to the company. But the only thing that ties both the location and the company together right up front is that inventory asset account map. And that's where I mentioned where the product is actually is. So where it's being housed in the location, but it's owned and obtains the money from the customer. So that's why it's connected to both of them. So moving on along, we're going to talk about adding new locations within Encompass. Now, adding new locations is not as simple as just adding a record on a table. It is a very complex and intricate process. So new locations can only be created by Encompass Professional Services due to how extensive and just how easily it is to miss steps. Now, towards the beginning, records will be added by professional services, and then it kind of gets handed off to you as a distributor with advice and how to kind of nurture for that. Once those are, then you'll take it over as the EasyB customer, and you'll kind of allow it to grow and you'll work on it yourself. And I kind of like to think of these stages and these processes kind of as a tree. And so we're going to get into that just a little bit more here in just a few slides. So starting out, we're going to go into stage one. Now, stage one is solely done by Encompass, our professional services team. As I mentioned, this is not just going to the locations table and clicking add a record. There are many things that can go wrong with that. There are so many intricate details, complex situations where it needs to be done by our Encompass team to set up the required information and the actual foundation of the new location. So this is where our team will be kind of setting up the bins, the adjustment distribution areas, and all the nitty gritty of the work. So that's why I like to think of this as a tree, because we as Encompass, we are pretty much giving you the seed. We are planting that seed for you, and we are kind of growing it from the roots right now. We are doing all that nitty gritty work under the surface. Those roots are growing, and we're trying to get this seed to now sprout. So, as those roots are being made, we then go on to stage two, which is us working with you as a distributor and advising you on how you should be taking care of this tree sapling. So, we're going to advise you on some of the more important things like transfers, the account mappings, promotions, what this is going to look like now in a specific view for you as the distributor. And we're just going to keep advising you along the way and make sure that all those are aligning to make sure it grows properly. We are going to be teaching you how to water the, the seed, so to say. We're going to show you how much sunlight it needs, how much nutrients it needs, and we're going to work on that together. And we're just going to be with you on that process to kind of get all this done together. Now, once stage three comes, this is mostly us handing it off to you. You now have this seedling. You can see a little sprout above the ground. You can see it growing, and you know how to take care of it. You know how to nurture it. You know how to further provide for it now. So you'll be the one that's watering this tree. You'll be the one that's adding the customers. You'll be the one that's creating the charge areas, the product groups, all that other information that is relevant or purposeful for your company as its own. You now have these tools, these resources, and us as backup if you need any more guidance. But now it's solely in your hands. So you can see that through allocations, promotions, brand families. Here's some more as well on identifying routes. Those routes along with the customers, your adjustment customers, how your warehouse is going to run specifically for this new location, how that's going to look for your specific customer with their route, anything like that. So now this is us kind of letting you take reign of this tree sapling and growing it to be your own. And we love to see it grow. So if you have questions, you always ask us, and we want to help you make. If you have new locations coming up, let us know. We'll be happy to kind of go and help you grow a new seed and get those roots growing again. So it's a very intense and complex process, but Encompass is there to help you along the way as well. So moving on along, we're going to talk about some system settings. Now, system settings are very important because, as it says in it, system settings apply to the entirety of the site. This is not a setting that you go and change on a specific a table that applies to a specific record. No, this is something that once it's changed, it is changed for the entire site. So that's why it takes a lot of caution and a lot of identification to understand what we're actually changing in the site. You can't just go and set a system setting by location or by company, for example. Now, using system setting is usually just a step in a larger process for whatever that setting relates to. And these are different from session settings, where session settings are typically done within the My Profile, and they only apply to that specific user session where it's solely for them. They're able to go into it their own way, but that's just a session setting. The system setting is going to affect everybody all throughout the entire site. So that's why it's a big kind of differentiation and why system settings are very important. So along with that, that is why system settings have a lot of specific permissions that are required to changing anything. And that's what you want. You don't want someone who's new or who shouldn't have access to this going to change a system setting for just no reason. There should be consulting. There should be kind of information regarding this and who has that capability to do it. And we do have a settings table that gives a list of all the settings and the required edit permissions. There's also a dashboard that tells you them as well. And you can kind of see of okay, this system setting was updated, but who did it? And so you can see a lot of those information because it is so important. You want to make sure that system settings are changed for the entire site, but properly and are known by the entire site, not just willy-nilly type of thing. So that's a huge key takeaway for system settings. It's making sure that you know what's happening and who has permissions to actually make these system settings. So moving on, we do have some key takeaways that I really want to leave you guys with for today. And the biggest one being that adding companies and adding a new location is a very collaborative, intuitive process. It does not just happen in a moment. It takes days, it could take weeks. It takes a team. It takes Encompass. It takes you as the distributor to kind of advise all this. It takes us together to work through it, to grow the street to what we want it to be. And it can take time and it's very collaborative. So it's not going to happen at the snap of your finger. It will take work from both sides. Now, system settings also, as I mentioned, are site wide. So please, if you decide to change anything, if you want to update anything, there needs to be a lot of discussions and care that comes with it. Like I said, you can't just be going changing things willy nilly type of thing. And then also, as your needs evolve over time to include more companies, settings, locations, we as Encompass will grow with you. Like I said, if you need a new location, we'll be there to help you. We'll be there to start that tree. We'll be there to help start that location and let it grow with you. If you need guidance on sites or excuse me, system settings to kind of figure out what's happening or what you recommend, we'll help you. We'll make sure that we understand from both parties what this will do for you and your company and how it could impact it. So please never hesitate to reach out in any of these regards. And along with that, does anybody have any questions? And I'll wait a few minutes here to see if any questions do populate. But I do want to mention that this recording will be posted in the recording archive section on the BevEd portal. So please, if you want to rewatch this, please go there. There's also a bunch of other resources that you can find there. And we do have Bev, who's really eager and ready to kind of answer your questions and help you out along the way as well. So as mentioned, you can go ahead and go there, ask us questions, but for right now, I will leave this open to see if anybody has any questions. Alrighty, I'm not seeing any questions populate anymore. So with that, I want to say thank you for all my attendees. Thank you for joining. Again, if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to ask Bev. You can also find this again in the recording archive. So please, like I said, if you have questions, please refer to there. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Alrighty, thanks so much for joining. Bye-bye.